Chapter 13. Just the two of us. 2 mornings later, as the boy left the kitchen, he squinted thoughtfully. "I dunno," he told Rags. "Outside the garden gate, what's wrong with this morning? But things ain't right. Miss Jones, I mean," he added as they walked toward the wood heap. "I barely saw her at breakfast. She must have been inside talking to someone." Still slightly puzzled, he began to chop kindling. Rags sprawled in the shade of the empty wheelbarrow. The two grew absorbed in the work, but both looked around when the gate slammed repeatedly behind them. Ross and his men were straggling through. The men kept straight on for the horse yards, nodding with soft good days as they passed. But Ross stopped to say, "Hi, son, how's things with Powder and Patches? I ain't seen you much since the boss got back." As he finished, he called to one of the men, "Saddle the Roman-nosed bay for me. I'll be over in a minute." After the man replied, Ross turned to the boy to add, "I reckon they're quieter now." "Yeah," the boy answered, "they surely are. You can do anything when you tidy up round 'em." Rags inched forward, and the boy bent and sleeked the smooth, silky ears. Noticing briefly, Ross nodded. "Sure, and you ought to be able to. The boss covers a lot of country when he goes on a tour." He rolled a cigarette before adding, "I believe you did the same. I heard you had a fair old day." While Ross lit the cigarette, Boy said, "You mean me day off?" "We did a bit, but not all that much. Maybe 10 or so miles at the most." Ross nodded again and let smoke drift out of his mouth. "Still," he said, 10 miles ain't bad if you're walking. Did you run into anything strange?" "Not that you would, I reckon. Things stay pretty much the same," and he prepared to leave. The boy thought for a moment and decided not to tell Ross about the Aboriginal. The man might have been on walkabout from another district, or he might have been one of the Yambura tribesmen. No, he more or less lied. There wasn't all that much. "We saw a mob of roos in a valley. Apart from that, we just had a good day tramping." Ross scratched his neck. "Well," he said, "if you reckon just tramping makes a good day, that's fair enough. Now I'd better get on with some work." He took a few short, undecided paces. "I thought you might have run into an odd Aboriginal. There's a few of 'em hunt out that way." Bow-legged on his worn-over boot heels, he rocked away toward the horse yards. As he passed the little feed shed, he scratched his neck again. "I don't know," he thought, "but for a young'un, he's pretty close-mouthed. I send Wiranuna out for a day to keep an eye on him, and all the young'un says is we saw a mob of roos. Yet it ain't hard to see why he does it. He thinks he's covering for someone, and if he knew Wiranuna was his wild bush hunter, it'd spoil his day." Ross still had a puzzled smile on his face when he reached the horse yards. Inside, Wiranuna came to meet him, leading a saddled horse. "Hi, boss," the Aboriginal said. "What young fella boy say? Him is savvy for walkabout bush along me." As he said it, he pulled his wide-brimmed hat low to hide his beetled, flickering eyes. Ross let the smile break into a chuckle. "Get on with you," he said. "You're a born flamin' actor. As for the boy, I'm blessed if I know. You never can tell what's in his mind. It takes some sortin' out to understand." He dodged sideways as Wiranuna's horse lunged forward. The Roman-nosed bay behind reared high on its powerful haunches, while a man clung to its bridle. Ross waited until the bay plunged near him, then grabbed for the reins. "Give 'em to me," he grunted. "While you saddle your own, I'll see what he likes when I fork 'em." From where he stood, the boy watched movement in the horse yards. Mounted stockmen jostled out of the way as Ross swung up and straddled the bay. Then the boy saw horse and rider blur in a dust-swirling struggle. One moment Ross would jolt up high above the rails, the next he would be spinning around and around in the middle of a whirling tangle. Horse dust and rider ricocheted from side to side and end to end of the horse-filled yard. Finally Ross reefed the bay's head from between its two stiff forelegs and waved his hand. The boy heard him shout as he spurred the horse forward. Then the gate swung open. Ross and the mounted stockmen rode out in a flowing stream of loose horses toward the water trough. At the gateway there, the loose horses were driven through and allowed to gallop away. Ross and his men sat there fidgeting mounts, while Wiranuna leaned from his saddle to close the gate. After it was chained, he straightened, and the whole cavalcade jogged towards the wood heap. Ross rode in the lead, talking to Joe and Charlie. As they passed, the boy stepped backward to sit on the wheelbarrow. Some of the stockmen nodded, but most of them, like Ross, stared straight ahead with the habitual searching gaze of stockmen. After passing under the peppercorns, their horses broke into a canter. They headed eastward across a trackless, poorly grassed plain. Spread out before them lay the wide, sunburned country. Leaning back in the wheelbarrow, the boy kept them within sight until the sun's angle flared on his eyes. Dazzled for a moment, he turned his head away and saw the boss coming out through the garden gateway. He carried a bulging, strapped suitcase that swung bumpingly in his hand. As he met the boy's gaze, he smiled. "Hello there, son. You always seem to be sitting. Every time I see you, you're tipped up there in the wheelbarrow." He pulled the suitcase through after him, then let the gate swing shut. "I'm off to town," he added, "for a day or two. Keep an eye on the nags for me." Nodding brusquely, he walked, hampered by the suitcase, toward the big iron-roofed car shed. The boy stared open-mouthed before he finally scrambled up. "Yeah, sure," he called. "I'm on me way now to clean their stalls." Then he suddenly thought of a way to make amends. Gripping the wheelbarrow handles, he trundled quickly after the boss. As he drew alongside, Rags skidded to a stop with him. "Here you are," the boy said, self-consciously. "If you like to dump it in, I'll wheel it over for you." He held the barrow steady with both hands gripped on the handles. The boy chuckled as he hoisted the case into the barrow. "I don't know," he drawled, "that I'm a cripple, but thanks all the same. It'll be easier than carrying it." Suiting his pace to the boy's, he began walking again. They were halfway to the shed when he added, "The pup's doing well. He gets better looking every time I see him." The boy looked where he was going. To his mind, the case was bumping about more than was good for it. "Yeah," he nodded, steering between two ruts. "He's growing all right, and I tell you what," he said with emphasis, "he's got real intelligence. You don't have to teach him. He just seems to know what's wanted." Love and pride struggled with the breathless catch in his voice as the wheelbarrow bumped along. The boss glanced from the boy to the young dog padding happily behind him. Rag's nose almost touched the boy's dusty boots. "I don't know," he thought, "how you handle a problem like this. If there is a way, I'm blessed if I know it. Old Kanga has the answer, and I can't see him changing." They were close to the shed when he said, "I saw Kanga while I was out. He's coming in for a day or so soon." Walking ahead quickly, he opened the shed's wide doors. Wheeling the barrow in, the boy lowering its handles near a big open-top car. Mention of Kanga brought back all his memories. He felt choked for a moment over what he guessed Kanga intended. Helping to lift the suitcase, he said, "Ah, that'll be good. Me and Kanga get on fine together." He don't talk much, but you can sort of feel," and the boy left the words unfinished. Instead, he pulled the wheelbarrow clear to allow room for the car to back. He watched as the boss climbed into the driver's seat. In a few short starts, the engine roared into vibration. The boss half raised one hand as he jerked a gear lever with the other. "So long," he called, "and don't worry, I'll see that you get another." He reversed the car until clear of the doors, then swung it around skiddingly. The boy heard the engine whine as the car raced away. Nearing the peppercorns, it gathered more speed and spurted forward. A feather of dust spewed up behind, floating on the rutted track. Thoughtful face, the boy scratched his head. "I don't know," he said, "but I've never seen 'em drive like that before. But you know," he went on, looking down at Rags, "about what he said. If he gave me a pack of dogs, it wouldn't be the same. I lost Broga all right. The thing is now to hang on to you." With Rags nudging close to his heels, he wheeled the barrow back to the wood heap. From there, on his way to the stables, he remembered to slip inside the little feed shed. "We'll take some chaff with us for the midday crib," he told Rags as he pushed up the feed bin lid. Reaching inside, he scooped the 2 buckets full and lifted them out. The chaff shone brightly golden when he stood it in the sunlight. As he straightened, he looked around for Rags and noticed his tail poking out from under the bin. It wagged from sight while the boy watched. "Well, I'm blessed," he muttered. "He ain't been in there for a long time. I reckon, like me, he's rememberin'." Balancing the brimming buckets, he was nearly at the door when he heard Rags scrambling clear of the hole. The boy looked down as they went outside together. "You've grown all right," he said, "bigger even than I reckoned." "You reminded me then of Broga and the way she used to come out." Not knowing or understanding, Rags trotted behind. His nostrils twitched with the scents he had found in the hole. Under the cobwebby stable eaves, the boy hooked the buckets onto pegs. "They'll be right," he said, "until we want 'em." Go inside, he ambled between the shadowy stalls until he came to Powder and Patches. The 2 horses dozed, each in its separate stall. "Hi there," the boy told them, looking over their twin half-doors. "You still look a bit dozy, but a day or 2 of this will soon brighten you." Their halters hung on the doors, and he haltered each horse in turn. The tired animals bumped together as he led them outside. In a high-railed sandy yard near the big cattle crush, he let them go free. "There you are," he said. "You can have a roll or just stand and dream." For a while he watched them, revitalized at the feel of the hot, dry sand under their hooves. They rolled on their backs or lay wriggling on their sides. A pall of dust soon swirled over them. Shifting to avoid it, the boy went back inside. Rags trailed after him, glad to be shaded from the glaring sun. In the warm, shadowy quietness, the boy worked slowly. "There ain't no hurry," he told Rags. "Everyone's away, and there's just the 2 of us." Afterwards he climbed up on a stack of grain to peer out through a ventilating shutter. The slats shaded his eyes, and he stared toward the sandhills. Yellow under the noonday sun, they seemed silent and unchanging. The mirages danced in the usual distorted shimmer on the heat-hazed skyline. Above them crested the great domed arc of brassy blue. "It's all there," he told Rags, who had scratched and clawed up to sprawl beside him. "Like it is every day, and you never get tired of lookin'. Even the old eagle is on his float-about. You'd think he'd get tired, but he don't." Finally the boy slid down to the floor. "Come on," he said. "We'll set up their tucker before we bring 'em in. It's getting close to dinner time." Whistling softly, he busied himself tipping the chaff into the mangers. Then, bringing in Powder and Patches, the 2 horses nickered when he went outside carrying the empty buckets. After dumping them in the feed bin, he left Rags panting on the strawed floor. "Phew," he said before he went out again through the doorway. "It's hot all right. We'll clean the big trough this afternoon, and that'll cool us off." In the kitchen, Miss Jones looked around as the boy came in. "My," she exclaimed, "you must have been boiling out there in the sun. I hope you kept your head covered." She glanced at the boy's fair, tousled hair. He scuffed a hand over it as he pulled out a chair. "Ah," he said, "I've been in the stables, but it's hot wherever you are. You can't get away from it," and reached for the teapot. His mouth felt bone dry as he poured tea into his cup. Sweat poured in little beads on his forehead. Miss Jones moved slowly, setting a plate of cold meat in front of the boy. Perspiration beaded her own flushed face. "You're the only one at home," she said with a smile, "so I'll cook dinner tonight. Help yourself to pickles. I'm afraid there are no lettuces left." The girls forgot to water them. She meant the aboriginal maids, who seldom seemed to be about. The boy began to eat. "It don't matter," he said, with his mouth full. "I like pickles best. They leave a better taste in your mouth." Eating between gulps of cooling tea, he lapsed into silence. Miss Jones stood near the door, fanning herself with a fly whisk. The boy noticed her face. Wisps of damp hair clung to her forehead. She looks tired, he thought, and I don't wonder at it. The extra heat the last few days must be tellin' on her. If I'd have been the boss, I'd have taken her away with me. Do her good to have a spell in town. Thought of the boss made him say, "The boss went to town this mornin'. I helped him shove his case in the car." Miss Jones hooked the whisk on a nail, bustling for a moment with her usual brisk movements. She began to tidy the sink. "Yes," she told the boy, "he has some business to attend to. Among other things, he's looking for someone to take my place." She turned her back to the boy as she said it. Her large white hands fumbled awkwardly. The boy stared. He had to swallow twice before he managed to say, "Cor, you don't mean you're leavin'? It wouldn't be the same without you, Miss Jones, I mean." He added, glancing around the kitchen, "I don't know, but you know how it is. If a feller came in here and you weren't here, He couldn't find the words and pushed away his plate. His mind tried to picture Miss Jones not being there who would take her place. "There ain't anybody," he thought, "who could. You couldn't find another one like her. She just seems to fit in every sort of way." As if to herself, Miss Jones said, "But I have to. No one could stay here forever. Besides, it won't be for some time yet, so stop worrying about it now. Would you like some cold pie and custard? There's some on the sideboard." Close to tears herself, she brushed the wispy hairs away from her forehead. Her hands felt cold, despite the heat. The boy shook his head. "No," he told her. "No thanks, Miss Jones. I'll just sit here and drink me tea. I'm glad you ain't going right away. If you have a bit of time, you can think. Get used to things, whatever they be." And he stared down at the table in front of him. Miss Jones, in turn, stared out through the open window. She felt too full in the throat to answer. Chapter 14. In the days that followed, the boy found it hard to concentrate. His hands felt unwilling in doing the work they had to do. "I know," he told Rags more than once. "You have to keep going, but what'll happen when Miss Jones goes? It won't be the same, I can tell you that." Yet in the kitchen Miss Jones tried to act in her usual manner. She avoided mention of the fact that she was leaving. The thought often passed through her mind that she ought to stay for the boy's sake. And in a similar manner the boy tried to avoid thinking about Kanga, wondering when the old dog-man would decide to take Rags. But the thoughts returned again and again until they were always with him. He felt trapped, caught in a web spun by other people. They all went their ways and left him alone in the center. Like that big web in the shed, he thought, there's a beetle dead in the middle of it, and he's been there for months, yet there's been a dozen different spiders come and go since. You can say it's the same for me, though I ain't a beetle. With Rags at his heels, he wandered from stables to shed, and then to the wood heap or kitchen. If he spoke out loud, Rags listened contentedly. If the boy thought in silence, Rags was equally content. He liked it either way, as long as the boy was near. On a hot, still evening they sat outside the horse yards. The boy had his shoulders leaned back against a post. Under his drawn-up knees, Rags sprawled on the shaded dust. The two were sitting alone after watching Ross and his men unsaddle their sweat-caked horses. The men themselves had gone on to the quarters. A quiet, hushed silence brooded everywhere. Even the galahs hadn't started their late evening flutterings. Hunching his knees higher, the boy glanced beyond the peppercorns, then suddenly said, "Cor, there's someone comin', and he's almost here. It's Kanga, sure as anything." In his excitement, he scrambled up too quickly and startled Rags. They both stumbled, tangled with each other, until the boy clasped a rail. "Phew," he gasped. "That was close. I nearly cracked my skull." Without wasting more time, he clawed his way up the post. Perched on the top, he strained his eyes toward the horseman. Behind the man clustered a tight-knit pack of jostling dogs. The tall, lean horseman, habitually bowed to the saddle, was unmistakable. "It's Kanga, all right," the voice said, down to Rags, "and he's just coming in. He'll be round this way in a minute." Shading his eyes against the sinking sun, he tried to get a better view. He hoped to pick out Broga from the rest of the crowding pack, but all he could see were the numerous dusty heads and backs. They all looked alike from the distance. As Kanga drew closer, he circled wide of the stables to lead his pack past the stockman's chained dogs. Some of them barked at the sight of the old dogman, but he whistled commandingly, and the barking stopped as if cut in mid-air. Riding on, Kanga led the way to the bare, hard ground where he always chained his own dogs. Perched on his high post, the boy had time to study them. Strain as he would, he couldn't see Broga. Every head and tired, panting body passed before his eyes, but not that of the bitches. "She ain't there," he whispered, not able to believe. "She just ain't there, yet she must be." His hands shook when he slid down from the post. Trying to find reassurance, he thought he might have missed seeing Broga, but he knew that he hadn't. The knowledge stunned him. Hunched over as he walked, he headed for the little feed shed to wait for Kanga. Rags followed behind, close to the boy's dusty boots. At the shed the boy shut Rags inside, then waited for Kanga. When he came, the last red glints of sunset spread shadowy haze across the sandhills. In the softened light, Kanga's face seemed less gnarled as he stopped to say, "How are you, son? I thought I'd heard the tea-bell." His hands brushed, fumbling on his shirt front, until he felt what he wanted. He pulled the old burnt pipe from his pocket. Side by side with the boy, he strode stiffly toward the wood heap. They were passing the scattered logs before the boy could answer. The words jumbled tight in his throat. "I'm right," he managed to say, "but I was counting your dogs. You didn't have 'em all with you." His mind groped with the words, and he dreaded to hear the old man's answer. Kanga nodded under the wide, battered hat. His piercing eyes glanced toward the peppercorns. A scurry of galahs fluttered restlessly in their branches. "Yeah," he said, "I lost Broga. I reckon she didn't settle." The boy stopped suddenly. All movement seemed to drain from his legs. "You lost her," he choked, "but you couldn't. A man like you don't lose anything." Kanga paused long enough for the boy to begin walking again, then grunted, I lost her all right. She died a week after I left," and he half raised the empty pipe to his mouth before he let it fall to his side again. The boy caught his breath. "Dead," he whispered. "Why would she die? Poor Kanga, she was full of life. You could see it shining in her." He tried to see the old man's face under its sagging hat brim. Kanga jerked the hat still lower. Like I said, he told the boy, she didn't settle. She'd work all right, but wouldn't eat. I found her dead on her chain. He pushed open the gate. When they reached it, they went through one after the other. On the path to the bunkhouse, neither said another word. Tears clung wetly to the boy's eyelids, and he hung back so Kanga wouldn't know. The old man strode on until he reached the bunkhouse steps. On the second step up, he glanced around to see the boy scuff his face. "You don't want to worry," Kanga told him. "I didn't just leave her lie. She's buried snug in a bit of good dry ground." He clumped on again to his room beyond the boys. A match scraped as he struck it to light a lantern. In the faint golden glow creeping out, the boy sat down on the steps. He forgot about tea and thought about Broga. The feel of her soft, sleek coat between his hands seemed as real as when he had last touched her. "If I'd kept you," he thought, "some way or other you wouldn't be dead. I let you down when I let you go. It was me and Rags you were fretting after, and you died without seeing us. To make it worse, you needn't have died at all." He was still sitting slumped on the steps when Miss Jones came to find him. Her starched cap and apron loomed whitely in the shadowy darkness. "Your tea's on the table," she said softly. "I wondered where you were." She stood waiting, unable to see the boy's face clearly. His back was to the light streaming out from Kanga's open door. The boy straightened suddenly, pushing up from the steps. His mind felt clearer over what he intended to do. "Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Jones," he said. "I was sitting here dreaming. Though, you know," he added, as he walked together toward the kitchen, "I ain't really hungry. You hear things sometimes that sort of knock you flat." Miss Jones nodded while she wondered what it was he had heard. She guessed it was something to do with Kanga. In some ways the old man drew the boy to him. In others he almost broke the boy's heart. Some wondered why Kanga couldn't know or understand. In the kitchen she stood with a cup of tea in her hands. She tried to keep her gaze from the boy, but when she drank she watched him over the cup's rim. His face had such a creased, hurt look she could barely keep from laying a hand on his shoulder. Finally, as he pushed away his half-eaten meal, she said, "I suppose you don't feel like talking, but it helps sometimes, you know." She added the last sentence lamely. The thought occurred as she said it that a gulf had grown between her and the boy. Once she had been someone he could turn to. Now he was uncertain. She could sense it in his manner. The boy stared toward the open window. He could see the pale starred sky beyond. Maybe somewhere, he thought, there's a place for dogs. They can't just be alive like that, then finish. And as if suddenly coming back from far away, he said, "Oh, yes, I reckon it does, Miss Jones. It's just that sometimes there ain't anything you can say. It sort of don't seem real. You can't believe it yourself." He poured another cup of tea, then sat watching the steam curl up. Miss Jones forced a smile. "Whether you do or not," she said, "doesn't matter. Everyone likes to share their troubles. It helps to ease them." The boy watched her rinse her cup and saucer. "Yeah," he told her when the water stopped splashing. "Yeah, it does. You know what's happened, Miss Jones?" "No, you couldn't," he went on after gulping a great mouthful of tea. "There's only me and Kanga know. Broga's dead. Miss Jones dead finished. You won't never see her again." Choked, he pushed away from the table and walked to the door. He kept his back turned while he opened it. His flooded eyes could barely see the catch. "Oh, my dear," Miss Jones started to say, but the boy slipped outside. His boots scudded quickly as he hurried along the path. When he reached the gateway, he shouldered through and continued on to the little shed. Without food or scraps in his hand, he squatted down near the bin to hug Rags to him. "I don't know," he whispered, "whether what I've thought of is right. We'll just sit for a bit and think it out. After hearing about Broga, we've got to do something." He was still sitting hunched with Rags by his side when Kanga came to the doorway. The old dogman leaned to peer in before he said, "You didn't take long over tea. I heard the gate shut as you came out." The boy bent lower until his head touched his knees. He felt sick inside from worrying. "No," he mumbled, "I didn't eat much. You don't if you feel choked up. All I wanted was to sit here quiet-like." His voice sounded blurred, muffled against his trousers. Kanga stared, trying to pierce the darkness, while he filled and lit his pipe, and the thoughts that mixed with the long, deep puffs were his own dreams, the dreams of a lonely man. His life was lived with his dog pack. The ordinary dogs were easy to come by. He could have them for the asking from any stockman whose bitch whelped too many pups. Kanga's pride was his king dog, Skipper, the trained picked animal that ruled the pack. But the dog had reached an age when his great powerful body showed signs of tiring at the end of a long hard day. Early in the year Kanga had bred the dog to Broga, then saved Rags from the ensuing litter for only one purpose, to be king dog in Skipper's place. Rags to Kanga was as much the center of his wide, dusty world as the young dog was to the boy, more if the years were measured against Kanga, and Kanga knew his years were measured. "There won't be time," he thought, "to breed another, now Broga's gone. I ain't got a bitch that's good enough." With the last thought strong in his mind, he finally said, "You took it hard about the bitch, son, but like I said, you don't want to. She served her purpose." He tapped the pipe to clear the stem, and a shower of sparks scudded down. The boy raised his head. "Yeah," he said quickly, "she served her purpose all right. You know what she did, don't you, Kanga? She saved me from a bull over there in the horse yards." He straightened to point in the darkness. "You can't do anything more than that, can ya?" Kanga puffed thoughtfully. "No," he at last agreed, "you can't, yet it's what you'd reckon a good dog to do." The boy suddenly gritted his teeth. "Yeah," he almost shouted, "and she died for it because me and you didn't care. She fretted, Kanga, for me and the pup, though maybe," he lowered his voice to add, "more for me than the pup. You could see it in her eyes, Kanga. When you took her away, she was begging to stay, and you wouldn't let her." Hunching over again, he pressed his eyes on his knuckles. They were gripped on his knees in tight-fisted knots. Kanga shrugged his hopelessness. "You can talk and talk," he said, and not get nowhere. Things go the way they're meant, and you can't bring 'em back." Stiff-moving in his slow, sure way, he turned to merge with the darkness. His blurred, shadowy outline faded as quietly as it had come. All that remained was the strong, pungent smell of tobacco smoke. Still hunched on the floor, the boy strained to hear. When he heard the soft, slithery rustle of feet on dry wood chips, he straightened. The sound meant Kanga had passed the wood heap, pulling Rags with him. The boy scrambled up from the floor. Together they crept inside. In the quiet, warm darkness pressing heavily over them, they heard the gate bump as Kanga went through. You can hear for miles, the boy thought, on a night like this. We'll want to be careful. Just one extra sound, and someone'll be out looking. Treading lightly, he headed for the wood heaps. Rags padded behind, contentedly silent. Where the shadowy trousered legs in front led, he followed. His nose stayed close to the boy's dusty boots. On the wood heap the boy settled down against a log, dry-mouthed from the excitement building up in him. He whispered, "We'll wait, then I'll sneak on, me own, to the kitchen. With a bit of luck, I ought to get some tucker. We won't want much, just a bit of whatever's going." Leaning back to stretch his legs, he rested an arm across Rags. The slow, dark hours seemed a long time passing, but together they watched and waited.